The morning sun streamed through the tall arched windows of courtroom 3B, casting narrow beams of light across the polished wooden floor. The gallery was unusually full. Reporters, curious citizens, and a few family members sat whispering about the case on the docket. When the doors creaked open, a young black man stepped inside. He was neatly dressed in a charcoal gray suit with a crisp white shirt and a simple navy tie. He carried no briefcase, no files, just a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with the tension in the room. His name was David Carter, but most people in the gallery assumed he was the defendant, Judge Samuel Reynolds. A stern man in his late 60s known for his impatient demeanor, barely glanced up from the folder on his bench. His brows furrowed as he skimmed the first page, and a look of disapproval settled on his face even before David spoke a word. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The rustle of people standing filled the air. David nodded respectfully at the judge as everyone sat down again. Judge Reynolds cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, I've seen your type in this courtroom before. Frankly, I don't have much patience for repeat offenders who waste the court's time." The remark drew a few gasps from the spectators. David's posture didn't change. He clasped his hands together calmly on the table in front of him. "Your Honor," he said in an even voice. "I'd like to clarify," the judge interrupted sharply. "You'll speak when spoken to. This court will not tolerate excuses." Whispers swept through the gallery. A young reporter in the front row adjusted her recorder, sensing the tension in the room. David inhaled slowly and glanced at the spectators, some looking at him with pity, others with curiosity. The judge flipped another page of the file and shook his head. "Given your record, I see no reason to be lenient," Judge Reynolds declared, his tone heavy with finality. "You're looking at the maximum penalty for these charges." The room went still. Reporters scribbled furiously. David, however, didn't flinch. He simply sat upright, eyes fixed on the judge, his calm expression revealing nothing. A faint metallic clang echoed as Judge Reynolds set his gavel aside. The way he leaned forward on the bench made it clear he had already reached a conclusion about David Carter. His tone, clipped and icy, cut across the hushed courtroom. "You come in here expecting sympathy," he said, "but this court has heard enough excuses from men like you." A murmur rippled through the gallery. David didn't react. His fingers remained laced together on the table, thumbs brushing once wide, the only sign of the restraint it took not to answer back. "Your Honor," David began evenly. "I believe there may be—" "Quiet," Reynolds barked, stabbing a finger toward him. "You'll speak when I give you the floor. Until then, keep your comments to yourself." The tension tightened like a rope. A woman seated in the back shook her head and whispered to her neighbor, "He hasn't even explained his side." Reynolds opened the thin case file again and frowned at a highlighted line. "You were allegedly involved in obstruction during a previous trial, is that correct?" David's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "With respect, sir, that isn't accurate." "Enough," the judge cut him off again. "I'm not interested in stories. This court respects facts, not narratives invented to dodge accountability." David exhaled slowly through his nose, jaw tightening just for a moment before relaxing again. He chose not to argue. Across the aisle, an older man in a tan jacket leaned forward and muttered, "He's railroading him." "I can feel it." The court clerk shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Even she sensed something off about the judge's tone, but she kept her eyes on the notes in front of her. Judge Reynolds continued, his voice rising. "The justice system is tired of wasting time on cases like yours. I see no remorse, no accountability, only defiance." David's voice stayed calm but carried enough weight to reach the back of the room. "Sir, I've always respected the justice system. I'm here to cooperate fully, but I do believe the record before you contains—" The judge slammed his palm flat on the bench, thump. The sound made several spectators flinch. "You'll have your chance later. For now, I'm delivering this court's judgment," Reynolds declared, his words slicing through the air. An uneasy silence followed. The air felt heavy, charged with the feeling that something wasn't right. Janelle Price, a young reporter seated in the second row, tightened her grip on her notepad. She had been covering the courthouse for almost 3 years, but rarely had she seen a judge dismiss a defendant's right to speak so abruptly. She underlined a note. "Judge interrupts repeatedly, we bias." At the defense table, David adjusted his tie, the smallest of gestures, and fixed his gaze on the judge again, steady and unwavering. "I've reviewed your so-called record," Reynolds went on, Frankly, it paints the picture of a man who's learned nothing from his past encounters with the law. A ripple of disbelieving whispers swept through the room. Someone muttered, "Past encounters? What's he talking about?" David's lips parted as though to correct the record again, then closed. He remained silent, understanding that arguing now would only worsen the judge's anger. Accordingly, the judge concluded, "This court intends to impose the maximum penalty available under statute." "Maybe that will finally send a message." Gasps burst from a few spectators. From the back row, an elderly woman shook her head. "That's too harsh. The man hasn't even been heard." The judge ignored the stir. He reached for his pen to begin writing the sentence recommendation. At that moment, David cleared his throat gently. Not loud, just enough to be noticed. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "with all due respect, I believe there's crucial information about my role in this matter that has not been considered." Reynolds didn't look up. "I said you'd speak when permitted." David inclined his head slightly. "Understood, sir. But I do feel it would serve the court to hear it before proceeding." The bailiff shifted his weight from one foot to the other, sensing the rising tension. Up in the gallery, Janelle Price whispered to her photographer, "Something strange. He's not acting like a defendant. Listen to how he's talking. That's not how most people address the judge." The photographer nodded slightly, already raising his camera to capture David's expression, composed, professional, not fearful. The clock above the witness box ticked loudly in the heavy silence. Judge Reynolds set down his pen and stared at David with thinly veiled impatience. "You've tried the patience of this court long enough. If you think some last-minute plea will change my mind, you're mistaken." A few heads in the audience turned toward one another, as if sharing the same question. Why isn't this man panicking? Why isn't he begging? David's calm, almost measured breathing was the only sign that he was gathering himself for something important. David rested his palms on the table, posture straight, eyes steady. Despite the weight of the judge's words, he gave no sign of defeat, only the quiet confidence of a man who still had something powerful left to reveal. The creak of the wooden benches was the only sound that dared to fill the courtroom after Judge Reynolds's sharp declaration. The air felt so still that even the ceiling fan's slow spin seemed to echo. David Carter sat unmoving at the defense table, his hands resting flat, fingers relaxed but deliberate, like a man in control of himself, if not the situation. "Mr. Carter," the judge said finally, breaking the silence, "is there something you're not understanding about this process? The next words out of your mouth had better be a yes or no." David turned his head slightly, meeting the judge's eyes with quiet steadiness. "Your Honor," he said evenly, "I fully understand the process. I'm only asking for an opportunity to clarify something essential before a ruling is made." The judge's frown deepened, but David's voice had a measured cadence, the kind that made the people in the gallery lean forward to catch every word. "I've heard enough," Reynolds replied curtly. "This court won't be swayed by rehearsed speeches." For a heartbeat, David's jaw flexed, the first visible crack in his otherwise calm exterior. Still, his tone stayed level. "I'm not here to sway the court with speeches, sir. I'm here to ensure the truth is on record." A whisper rose from the back rows. "He talks like a lawyer," someone muttered. Judge Reynolds's gavel struck the bench. Bang. "This is your last warning," he snapped. "Another outburst and I'll hold you in contempt." The gallery collectively inhaled as if they all shared the same breath of disbelief. David didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly pushed back his chair and stood, not abruptly or defiantly, but with the smooth, deliberate motion of someone accustomed to being watched. The bailiff instinctively took a step forward. David clasped his hands behind his back and spoke again, his tone calm but carrying a weight that filled the room. "Your Honor, I respect this courtroom and I respect your role. I am not here to disrespect the bench or to delay justice, but I do believe there's a misunderstanding about who I am and why I'm here today." The statement made the spectators exchange glances. Janelle Price, the reporter, scribbled furiously in her notebook, "Who he is and why he's here." Judge Reynolds narrowed his eyes. "What exactly are you implying?" David kept his gaze steady. "I'm not implying anything, sir. I'm prepared to provide proof, but I'm asking to be allowed to speak fully, so that this court doesn't issue a sentence based on assumptions." The judge leaned back slightly in his chair, drumming his fingers on the wooden armrest. "You've already had ample opportunity to speak. You chose not to explain yourself earlier. David's voice softened, but the steel underneath it was unmistakable. I didn't explain myself because I wanted to hear the court's understanding of the case first. Now that I have, I realize crucial context is missing. An elderly man in the gallery whispered to his wife, "This fella isn't rattled one bit. Look how he's standing there. Not a drop of fear." The judge's gavel hovered over the bench but didn't fall. "Proceed carefully, Mr. Carter. You're walking a fine line." David inclined his head slightly, a subtle sign of respect. "Yes, Your Honor. I'll be brief." He moved a single step forward, the leather soles of his shoes clicking softly against the polished floor. The sound carried across the room, emphasizing how quiet it had become. "Before you continue with sentencing," David began, "I'd like to ask a few procedural questions about how this case was presented to the court." The judge looked surprised but hid it quickly behind a mask of irritation. "This is highly irregular," he warned. "Perhaps," David agreed, "but it's also critical. For example, was the prosecution present during all pretrial motions related to this case?" The gallery murmured at the question. It was the kind of inquiry no ordinary defendant would know to ask. Reynolds's brows knitted together. "That's none of your concern at this stage." "With respect, sir, it very much is," David replied. "Because if there was no prosecuting attorney present during those motions, the court may have been operating under incomplete information." Janelle's pen froze mid-sentence. She turned to her photographer and whispered, "No defendant would know that. He's been in courtrooms before, he's different." The photographer nodded, his camera poised. Judge Reynolds' posture stiffened. "Are you trying to cross-examine the court?" David shook his head lightly. "Not at all, sir. I simply want to ensure the record reflects the truth." For the first time since the proceedings began, the balance of control seemed to shift, just slightly, from the bench to the man standing before it. "Sit down," the judge ordered, though his voice lacked the earlier thunder. "I will." "Your Honor," David replied, "but I have one more question. Were you aware that the lead prosecutor in this matter requested a personal review of today's sentencing?" The judge hesitated, his lips parting before answering. "What relevance does that have to you?" David's reply was calm but layered with meaning. "It has every relevance, sir, and I believe the answer to that question will explain why I'm standing here today." A hush fell over the room again. The spectators sensed they were moments away from a revelation. David returned to his seat but kept his head high, his eyes never leaving the judge's. The tension that had once pressed down on him now seemed to rest squarely on Judge Reynolds' shoulders. The tension in courtroom 3B thickened until it felt as if the air itself had weight. A fluorescent light overhead buzzed faintly, adding an almost cinematic hum to the silence. Judge Reynolds shuffled a few papers on the bench, pretending to focus on the paperwork but clearly unsettled by David Carter's composed demeanor. In the gallery, whispers flitted like restless birds. People had come expecting a routine sentencing, nothing more than another name on the docket. But something about this defendant's calm, confident stance didn't add up. Janelle Price, the young reporter who had been scribbling furiously since the beginning of the hearing, flipped back through her own notes. She had a vague memory of seeing David's name in a past headline. It nagged at her now. She leaned toward her photographer, murmuring, "I've heard this name before, but not as a defendant." The photographer lowered his camera and frowned. "Maybe a lawyer? He talks like one." Across the aisle, a retired bailiff named Mr. Howard, who had worked in the courthouse for decades, tilted his head toward the man beside him. "I've seen that young man before," he said in a gravelly whisper. "Not at the defense table. I just can't place where." Meanwhile, Judge Reynolds cleared his throat loudly to regain control of the room. "Enough delays," he declared. "Mr. Carter, your attempt to question this court's process is noted and overruled. We proceed to sentencing." David remained seated, his posture still perfectly straight, his hands loosely folded on the table. He didn't protest. That very stillness unsettled the judge even more. A creak came from the back door as another figure quietly entered, a middle-aged attorney in a navy blue suit. He handed a file to the court clerk and took a seat near the aisle. A few regulars in the gallery recognized him as a member of the district attorney's office. His unexpected arrival only deepened the murmur of curiosity. Janelle's pen hovered over the page as she stared at David's profile. Suddenly, like a spark in the dark, a memory surfaced. An article she'd written months ago about the city's new lead prosecutor. A man named David Carter, known for his sharp courtroom skills and commitment to reform. Her heart skipped a beat. She grabbed her phone, searched her own archives, and found the photo from that article. The same steady eyes, the same square-set shoulders. "Oh my gosh," she whispered to herself. Her photographer noticed the change in her expression. "What is it?" he asked. She turned the phone screen toward him. "That's him. He's not a defendant. He's the prosecutor." The photographer blinked. "You're kidding me." Janelle shook her head. "That explains everything. The way he talks, the questions he asked. He's the city's lead prosecutor. What is he doing at the defense table?" The realization started to ripple outward as Janelle shared it in hushed tones with the woman beside her, who then leaned to whisper it to the next person. Within moments, little sparks of recognition were igniting across the gallery. "Wait, you mean he's the prosecutor? Are you serious? That's David Carter? That can't be right. Why would he be treated like this?" Judge Reynolds noticed the wave of murmurs. His brow furrowed. "Order in the court," he snapped, striking the gavel once. "This is a courtroom, not a coffee shop. Anyone speaking out will be removed." The crowd quieted, but a charged hush lingered, thick with disbelief. Mr. Howard, the retired bailiff, slapped his knee softly. "Now I remember," he muttered under his breath. "He's the one who handled that big racketeering case last year. He put 2 gang leaders behind bars. That's no street-level defendant up there." Meanwhile, the attorney who had slipped in earlier, Assistant DA Marcus Lee, leaned toward the clerk and whispered something. The clerk's eyes widened as she glanced at David, then at the judge. She discreetly passed a note up to the bench. Judge Reynolds read the note and stiffened slightly. His face betrayed no words, but his hand froze mid-page. He set the paper aside and stared at David, who continued to sit quietly, a picture of controlled patience. Sensing a shift in the room's energy, David finally lifted his eyes to meet the judge's stare. There was no arrogance in his expression, only an unspoken insistence. "You deserve to know who I am before you pass judgment." Janelle kept her phone recording now, certain that the next few minutes would make tomorrow's headline. She typed a quick text to her editor. Huge twist. Defendant is actually lead prosecutor. Judge unaware. Stand by for footage. The air in the courtroom felt electric. Every spectator waiting for the moment when the truth would break open. Judge Reynolds cleared his throat again, his voice slightly less certain this time. "Mr. Carter, before I proceed further, is there any additional clarification you intend to offer this court?" David didn't rise immediately. He rested his palms on the table, glanced briefly at the gallery, many faces now staring at him with curiosity and dawning respect, and said, "Yes, Your Honor. I believe it's time to clarify everything." A heavy pause filled courtroom 3B. The judge's question still lingered in the air. "Any additional clarification you intend to offer this court?" All eyes fixed on David Carter. The only sounds were the low hum of the ceiling fan and the soft scratching of Janelle Price's pen across her notebook. David rose slowly from his chair, straightening the cuffs of his suit jacket as though preparing for a closing argument. His measured movements conveyed respect, not rebellion. The subtle authority in the way he stood caught the attention of every spectator. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm but firm enough to carry to the farthest row. "For the last hour, I've remained silent because I wanted to understand how this court viewed the matter at hand. I've listened carefully to every word you've spoken. Now I believe I owe you the full truth." Judge Reynolds narrowed his eyes. "Proceed," he said, though his tone lacked the iron edge it had earlier. David clasped his hands in front of him. "The record you've been reading from is incomplete. It names me in the caption of this case, but it fails to note the capacity in which I appear. I am not the defendant in this matter. I am," he paused, not for effect but as if weighing the gravity of the moment. "I am the lead prosecutor who filed this case on behalf of the state." The words hit the room like a gavel strike. A collective gasp rose from the gallery. Someone in the back let out an audible, "You're kidding." The judge blinked once, then again, his stern facade cracking. What did you just say?" David reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and withdrew a slim leather wallet. He opened it to reveal a gold-embossed badge and an identification card. "Here are my credentials. Your Honor, David Carter, lead prosecutor, assigned to this jurisdiction." The bailiff stepped forward instinctively to inspect the badge, then nodded silently to the judge to confirm its authenticity. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Janelle was already typing furiously on her phone. Confirmed. Defendant is actually lead prosecutor. Judge visibly stunned. Judge Reynolds' mouth opened slightly, then closed as he fumbled for words. He set down the gavel he'd been gripping. This can't be right. The docket clearly lists you as the accused party. With respect, sir, David replied. An administrative error placed my name in the defendant's line during filing. I intended to attend this sentencing today as an observer. I chose to sit at the defense table only because I wasn't provided the usual seat for prosecution counsel. I didn't think the oversight would lead to assumptions about my identity. The judge's face flushed a shade darker as a ripple of laughter, quickly stifled, swept across a few rows in the gallery. He tapped his pen nervously on the bench. I see, Reynolds murmured, regaining his composure. Why didn't you identify yourself immediately? David's voice stayed steady, respectful but firm. Because, Your Honor, I wanted to see how the court approached the matter, not as a prosecutor or an officer of the state, but as an ordinary man who appeared to fit a certain profile. I believed it was important to witness that perspective firsthand. The statement landed heavily. Even those who had doubted David's calm composure earlier now regarded him with newfound respect. Janelle's photographer whispered, "That's gutsy." He let the judge show his true colors before revealing who he was. Judge Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mr. Carter, I owe you an apology. The court should not have presumed anything about you." David inclined his head slightly. "I accept your apology, Your Honor. But my purpose in allowing the misunderstanding to continue wasn't to embarrass the court. It was to highlight how easily assumptions can mislead justice." The gallery broke into quiet applause before the bailiff raised a hand to settle them down. Reynolds cleared his throat. "Well, the court stands corrected. The record will be amended to reflect your actual position in this case." David stepped closer to the bench, lowering his voice but ensuring the microphone still caught his words. "Thank you, Your Honor. I'd also like to emphasize that no one should ever be judged by appearance or assumptions. Our system demands better from all of us." His words resonated in the hushed room. Even the court reporter paused momentarily, her fingers resting on the keys. The tension that had hung over the courtroom for the past hour seemed to shift entirely. Where there had been an air of impending punishment, there was now an undeniable sense of accountability. Judge Reynolds, visibly humbled, nodded. "You've made your point, Mr. Carter. This court will reflect on today's proceedings carefully." David returned to his seat but remained upright, his composure intact. For the first time, it was the judge, not the supposed defendant, who looked unsettled beneath the gaze of the gallery. The courtroom remained hushed long after David Carter sat back down. It wasn't the silence of boredom or routine procedure. It was the kind that follows a lightning strike, when everyone's still trying to process what just happened. Judge Reynolds shuffled the papers in front of him, clearly trying to regain some sense of control. The tremor in his hand was faint but noticeable. His gavel, which he had slammed so confidently earlier, now rested quietly on the bench as if it too had been humbled. I believe we need to recess," Reynolds finally announced, his voice lacking the authority it once carried. 10 minutes. The bailiff called for order as the judge disappeared through the side door without looking back. A low hum of conversation immediately rose in the gallery. Some spectators stood, stretching and shaking their heads in disbelief. Others clustered into small groups, whispering animatedly about what they'd just witnessed. Near the front, reporter Janelle Price was typing furiously on her phone. Her editor had sent a single-word message. Live. She raised her phone and recorded a quick update for her outlet's social media feed. "This is Janelle Price reporting from courtroom 3B, she began, her voice steady though her eyes still reflected astonishment. In a shocking twist, the man Judge Reynolds appeared ready to sentence to the maximum penalty is actually the lead prosecutor in the case. The judge's reaction and the defendant's composure have left this courtroom stunned. We'll bring you more updates as this story unfolds." Her cameraman nodded approvingly. Within seconds, the clip was posted online. At the defense table, David Carter quietly retrieved his leather wallet and badge, sliding them back into his pocket. He leaned slightly toward the real defendant. a middle-aged man who had been silent during the entire exchange. "Don't worry," David said in a low voice, his tone gentle. "We'll make sure the proceedings focus on the facts now, not on assumptions." The man nodded, his expression a mix of relief and lingering confusion. Meanwhile, in the gallery, a woman in her 60s whispered to the man next to her, "Did you see how calm he stayed through all of that? That's what real dignity looks like." Her comment reflected the sentiment echoing across the room: admiration for David's restraint in the face of public humiliation. The bailiff eventually called for order again as Judge Reynolds re-entered the courtroom. The once confident man now appeared slightly smaller, as if carrying the weight of his own misjudgment. He cleared his throat, then adjusted his glasses before addressing everyone. "Before we continue," he said, his tone measured, "I feel it necessary to acknowledge what transpired earlier. I allowed an assumption, an unfounded one, to cloud my judgment in this courtroom. For that, I extend my apologies to Mr. Carter and to all present today." His statement drew nods from several spectators. Even the court reporter looked up briefly, surprised at hearing such words from a judge known for his hard-edged demeanor. David rose respectfully. "Your Honor, apology accepted. My hope is that this incident serves as a reminder that no one, not even officers of the court, is immune to bias. We all have a duty to check ourselves before we act on assumptions." The words carried an almost sermon-like resonance. A few people in the gallery began clapping before the bailiff raised his hand to restore order. Reynolds nodded solemnly. "Point well taken. Let's proceed with the actual case." Though the hearing moved forward, the focus remained on David. His quiet composure had turned him into something of a symbol in the room, proof that dignity and truth could prevail, even in the face of authorities' missteps. Outside the courthouse, the story was spreading rapidly. Janelle's live update had already gone viral, with hashtags like "Charmed Lead Prosecutor Twist" and "Your Courtroom Lesson" trending within hours. Clips of David calmly revealing his badge were being shared across platforms, often captioned, "This is what grace under pressure looks like." Inside the courtroom, as the official proceedings continued, David made a conscious effort not to bask in the attention. He redirected his focus to the case at hand, questioning witnesses with precision and professionalism, as though nothing unusual had happened earlier. But when the session adjourned for the day, reporters gathered in the hallway, eager for a statement. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward as David exited the courtroom. "Mr. Carter, how did you stay so composed during the misunderstanding?" one journalist asked. David stopped, glanced at the sea of expectant faces, and replied, "Staying calm wasn't easy, but I've always believed that dignity isn't about how loudly you speak. It's about how firmly you stand when you know the truth." Today was a reminder to all of us that respect and fairness can't be optional in a courtroom. Another reporter chimed in. "Do you think the judge's assumptions reflect a larger issue in our justice system?" David's tone grew more serious. "I think it reflects an issue we all share as human beings. We're quick to label, quick to assume. If this experience has any value, it's in showing that justice begins with how we see one another. We can't claim to uphold the law if we can't first uphold equality." The crowd murmured in agreement. Those words, recorded and broadcast within minutes, would become the headline quote across national media outlets. Justice begins with how we see one another. As David made his way down the courthouse steps, the atmosphere was markedly different from when he'd first arrived. Strangers approached to shake his hand. One elderly man said, "You gave us hope today, son. You showed them what real justice looks like." David smiled modestly and replied, "Justice isn't about me. It's about all of us demanding better and practicing it ourselves." Meanwhile, Judge Reynolds, still inside his chambers, stared at his reflection in a framed certificate on the wall. For the first time in years, he questioned whether he had allowed habit and bias to cloud his duty to the law. The fallout of that day wasn't just about headlines or trending hashtags. It marked the beginning of introspection for an entire courtroom, a stark reminder that authority doesn't exempt anyone from accountability. By the next morning, the courthouse scene had shifted from quiet whispers to a full-scale media spectacle. News vans lined the street outside courtroom 3B, their satellite dishes tilted toward the sky like mechanical sunflowers. Cameramen uncoiled cables on the sidewalk while anchors rehearsed their lines about the stunning reversal that shook a city's Faith in first impressions. The video of David Carter revealing his badge, calm, poised, and unshaken, had surpassed 10 million views overnight. Hashtags such as Justice with Dignity, Never Assume, and David Carter Moment were trending worldwide. Late-night hosts replayed the clip with commentary, while serious talk show panels debated what the incident revealed about bias in the justice system. Inside his modest apartment, David sipped his coffee as the morning news replayed his own words. Justice begins with how we see one another. His phone buzzed constantly. Messages from colleagues, law students, community leaders, even strangers thanking him for standing tall with grace. Still, David felt no prideful glow. He knew the headlines would fade, but the lesson needed to last. That same morning, Judge Samuel Reynolds sat in his private chambers, staring at a stack of letters and emails that had poured in overnight. Some were critical, demanding his resignation. Others were surprisingly compassionate, urging him to acknowledge his mistake publicly and do better. The weight of the backlash was undeniable. In a rare move, Judge Reynolds released a statement to the press. Yesterday's events reminded me that authority does not place us above error. I regret my assumptions and will take steps to examine my own biases so that every individual who enters my courtroom is treated with equal respect. The statement surprised many, even softening some critics. It became part of the story, a reminder that humility can follow even the harshest misstep. Later that week, David agreed to appear at a community forum on justice reform. The auditorium was filled to capacity, law students clutching notebooks, parents with teenagers, local officials, and members of the press. Standing behind the podium, David began not with the courtroom incident but with a story from his childhood, about his father teaching him to treat everyone with dignity, even those who mistreated him. None of us are perfect, David told the audience, his tone steady and sincere. But if we don't challenge the assumptions we carry, we risk letting them guide decisions that affect someone's entire life. That day in court wasn't about me versus a judge. It was about showing that fairness must be more than a principle written on paper. It has to live in how we see and treat one another. His words drew a standing ovation. The next day, the local paper ran the headline, "Lead Prosecutor Turns Viral Moment into a National Conversation." Meanwhile, Janelle Price's exclusive coverage of the courtroom drama earned her an award nomination for public interest journalism. She later admitted in an interview, "What struck me most was how a single misunderstanding exposed so much about our system, and how one man's composure changed the narrative." The ripple effects didn't stop there. Several law schools invited David to speak on implicit bias in the courtroom. A civic organization launched an online campaign encouraging people to share stories about moments when they'd been misjudged, using the hashtag, "See the person, not the assumption." In the weeks that followed, Judge Reynolds initiated voluntary workshops for his staff on fairness and equity in judicial practice. Though some skeptics dismissed it as damage control, others saw it as a genuine attempt to rebuild trust. One evening, as David left the courthouse after a long day, he was approached by an elderly woman holding a newspaper folded neatly under her arm. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, "I watched the video of you standing up in that courtroom. I've lived long enough to see a lot of things go wrong in this world, but you gave me hope that it's still possible to do the right thing with grace." David smiled, humbled. "Thank you, ma'am. I just hope it reminds us all to slow down before we judge anyone." As the sun dipped below the city skyline, David reflected on the whirlwind of the past few weeks. He hadn't planned to become a symbol of justice reform or to make headlines. He'd simply chosen to stay calm and tell the truth at the right moment. If you believe that respect should be the foundation of justice everywhere, type respect in the comments, and share this story to remind others that dignity can be the strongest form of power.